1970, 11 racetracks, 6 factory teams, every single pony car maker in America on the same starting grids at the same time for the first and only time in history. Chevrolet arrived as the two-time defending champion, selling a street car that was faster than Ford's. Ford arrived with a smaller engine, a slashed budget, and a stock car mechanic from South Carolina. One of these companies was about to win the most competitive season American road racing has ever seen, by a single point. Spoiler alert, it was not the one with more horsepower. This is the story of the year. The slower car won the war. Let me paint you a picture of America in 1970. The Beatles are breaking up. Apollo 13 is having a very bad week, and Detroit's horsepower war has reached its absolute peak. More cubic inches, more stripes, more insurance agents fainting at their desks than any year before or since. But here's what made 1970 different. That year, the war stopped being a metaphor. It moved on to 11 road courses across North America, in a series called the SCCA Trans Am Championship, where the marketing ended, the stopwatches started, and somebody was going to lose in public. Quick recap for anyone who missed our episode on 1967. Chevrolet built the Camaro for one purpose: killing the Mustang. They literally defined the name at a press conference as a small, vicious animal that eats Mustangs. And by 1968, on the racetrack, that animal was feasting. Roger Penske and a driver named Mark Donohue took Camaros to back-to-back Trans Am championships in 68 and 69, on the very circuits Ford had ruled in 66 and 67. The Mustang, America's original pony car, had been dethroned by its own copycat. Dearborn was not amused. And here's where Ford's comeback plan gets weird. For 1970, Ford slashed its entire racing budget by roughly 75%. Then it dropped Carroll Shelby. Yes, that Carroll Shelby, and handed its only Trans Am team to Bud Moore, a World War II veteran from Spartanburg, South Carolina, who had made his name turning wrenches in stock car racing. On paper, this looks like a company giving up. Fire the legend, hire the mechanic, cut the money. Every sports movie ever made starts exactly like this, right before the underdog does something unforgettable. The weapon itself had an even better origin story. To design it, Ford president Bunky Knudsen, freshly poached from General Motors, poached one more thing from General Motors, a designer named Larry Shinoda, the man who had shaped Corvettes. The project was so secret that whenever anyone asked Shinoda what he was working on, he'd just say, "The boss's car." The name stuck, so let's be clear about what happened here. Two former GM men built a Mustang, named it after each other, and pointed it directly at GM's throat. Detroit soap operas write themselves. Under the hood, the boss, 302 cubic inches of pure spite. Solid lifters chattering like angry typewriters. Canted valve cylinder heads, borrowed from the upcoming 351 Cleveland, heads so big they were basically wearing a smaller engine as a costume. A giant 7080 Holley 4-barrel, 10.5 to 1 compression. Motoring, official rating, 290 horsepower. And that word, official, is doing some heavy lifting because a Ford engineer reportedly dynoed the thing well above 300. Funny detail. 290 was the exact same number Chevrolet had claimed for its old Z28 engine. Two rivals, lying by precisely the same amount. That's not competition, that's synchronized swimming. The rest of the car was just as uncompromising. 4-speed manual, only, no automatic existed, at any price. No air conditioning either. You got quick, 16 to 1 steering, sway bars at both ends, staggered rear shocks, front discs, and fat F60 tires. Base price, $3,720. And buyers understood the assignment because production exploded from 1,628 cars in 69 to 7,013 in 1970. 7,000 people bought a street-legal race program with a warranty, and Ford needed every single one of them because of what the SCCA required. Meanwhile, over at Chevrolet, chaos, wrapped in the most beautiful body Detroit had ever stamped. The all-new second-generation Camaro arrived in February of 1970, half a year late, which is why people call it the 1970 and a half. Gorgeous car. Genuinely one of the best-looking American shapes of all time. But behind the curtain, disaster. Roger Penske, the architect of both championships, had defected to Little American Motors, taking superstar Mark Donohue with him. The two-time champion had just lost its entire brain trust. So Chevrolet dialed the one man in Texas who might save the season, Jim Hall of Chaparral fame. So the champion lost its dream team, and the challenger lost its budget. Even fight, right? Wrong, because Chevrolet was about to raid the Corvette parts shelf. Again. Here's the twist that changed everything. For 1970, the SCCA quietly rewrote its rulebook. Teams could now take a bigger engine and destroke it down to the 5-liter class limit, which meant the street car no longer needed a tiny screamer under the hood. So Chevrolet looked at the Camaro, looked at the Corvette, and performed its favorite magic trick. It dropped the Corvette's brand new LT1 350 straight into the Z28. If that maneuver sounds familiar, congratulations, you've seen our 1993 episode. Chevrolet borrowing Corvette engines is not a strategy, it's a lifestyle. And what an engine to borrow. 350 cubic inches, 360 horsepower at 6,000 revolutions per minute, 380 pound-feet of torque, 11-to-1 compression, solid lifters, forged crank, 4-bolt mains, and I promise this is true, the same 780 Holley 4-barrel as the Boss. 2 sworn enemies breathing through identical carburetors. The Corvette version was rated at 370, the Camaro at 360, detuned by exactly 1 press release. Oh, and for the first time in Z28 history, you could order an automatic. The gentleman's option had arrived. Now, the price, and this is where Ford fans usually start celebrating too early. The Z28 package cost $572.95, which sounds like a bargain, until the mandatory options showed up. Required 4-speed or automatic, required POS traction, required everything, pushing the real cost of entry past $900 over a base Camaro. One Period magazine's fully equipped tester rang up at $4,518. Add insurance premiums that treated Z28 owners like arson suspects, and no air conditioning. The LT1 flatly refused to power one. So no, the Camaro wasn't meaningfully cheaper. In the real world, these two cost about the same money. The difference was what that money bought. Because on paper, this isn't a comparison, it's a mugging. 70 more horsepower for the Camaro. 70, 90 more pound-feet of torque. 48 more cubic inches. The Boss brought a scalpel to a fight where Chevrolet had legally smuggled in a sledgehammer. Ford stayed loyal to the pure 5-liter formula that racing originally demanded. Chevrolet read the fine print of the new rules and gave its street customers the biggest engine the loophole allowed. 2 companies, 2 philosophies. One of them was about to look very clever for about 5 months. The magazines confirmed the math, car and driver. May 1970, the Z28 ran 0 to 60 in 5.8 seconds and the quarter mile in 14.2 at 100.3 miles per hour. The same magazine 3 months earlier, on the Boss, 14.9 at 93.4. Now, full honesty, because pedants are watching, different tests, different days, and that Camaro was an automatic wearing drag-friendly 4.1 gears. But 0.7 of a second and nearly 7 miles per hour of trap speed? That's not test day noise, that's a verdict. And the press didn't just clock the Camaro, they fell in love with it. Car and driver called the 70Z28, a car of brilliant performance and uncommon merit, which in magazine language is a marriage proposal. So let's say it plainly. On the street, in 1970, the Camaro was the quicker car. Full stop, better numbers, glamorous new body, the beating heart of a Corvette. If this story ended at a stoplight, Chevrolet wins, and this video is 9 minutes long. But 1970 wasn't graded at stoplights. It was graded on 11 racetracks, and the tuition was brutal. See, the entire reason both of these cars existed was a rulebook. The SCCA's Trans Am series ran production-based sedans, real cars from real showrooms sold to real customers. The rules forced Detroit to homologate its racers, meaning if you wanted to race it on Sunday, you had to sell it to the public on Monday. That single requirement is why the Boss 302 and the Z28 exist at all. Racing regulations accidentally became the greatest gift the American driveway ever received. Bureaucracy created beauty. Write that down. It never happened again. And 1970s grid, oh, this grid. Every American pony car maker showed up with a factory effort. The only time, ever. Ford with Bud Moore's school bus yellow Mustangs. Chevrolet with Jim Hall's Chaparral Camaros. American Motors with Penske, Donohue, and Peter Revson in Javelins. Plymouth hired Dan Gurney's own team to run Barracudas with Swede Savage. Dodge fielded the Challenger with Sam Posey. Even Pontiac sent a factory Firebird. Indy winners, Le Mans veterans, future legends, all of them fighting over sedans with back seats. It was the deepest field American road racing had ever assembled. Leading Ford's charge, Parnelli Jones, former Indy 500 winner, off-road legend, and a man who drove a race car the way a lumberjack negotiates with a tree. Jones came from oval track racing, where contact was conversation, and he brought that dialect to a paddock full of polite road racers in string-back gloves. Sam Posey later summed up the whole era. By 1970, he said, the Trans Am had basically become stock car racing, and it was wonderful. Fenders were no longer bodywork. They were negotiating tools. On the other side, Mark Donohue, the scientist, the engineer with a driver's license, so precise they called him Captain Nice while he calmly took your lap record apart. Jones and Donohue had been circling each other since the 60s, the sledgehammer versus the slide rule, and 1970 was the collision. A humiliated Ford, a defending champion missing its brain. A brand new Javelin wildcard. 11 races to settle everything. 11 races, 6 factories, 1 crown. Take a breath, because Detroit certainly didn't. The season opened at Laguna Seca, and Parnelli Jones drew first blood. Then Lime Rock, Jones again. Then Breyer, George Falmer, the other Bud Moore Mustang. Then Mid-Ohio, Jones. 4 races, 4 Ford victories. The slashed budget, fired Shelby, stock car mechanic operation had opened the season with a perfect record. And Chevrolet's glamorous new factory Camaros, the quickest street cars in the class, remember, spent those 4 races staring at the back of 2 Mustangs painted school bus yellow. Because nothing humbles a 2-time champion quite like being overtaken by something the color of public transportation. Chevrolet's season, frankly, was a lesson in bad timing. The Chaparral program started late, the car itself launched half a year behind, and the team's in-house engine effort reportedly never extracted what the rules allowed. But the truly savage moment came at Donnybrook, in Minnesota. The first Camaro victory of 1970 finally arrived, scored by Milt Minter, a privateer, driving a year-old 1969 Camaro. Let that sink in. The customer's used car beat the factory's brand new one to victory lane. Somewhere in Detroit, a marketing executive quietly closed his office door. Then Donohue woke up. Bridgehampton, Javelin wins. Road America, Javelin again. A circuit up in Canada, Javelin, a 3rd time. 3 victories in 4 races. And suddenly, Little American Motors, the company we once called the Forgotten Champion, was hunting mighty Ford for the title. The scientist was reeling the sledgehammer in, point by point, and the championship math started getting uncomfortably tight for everyone wearing blue ovals. Chevrolet did get one real day in the sun, and it was earned. Watkins Glen, August. Vic Elford, the British ace subbing in the Chaparral Camaro, beat the Javelins and the Mustangs straight up, giving the factory its only win of the year. And credit where due, the 70 Camaro was never a slow race car. It was an unfinished one. Half a season of development, a mid-year body, an engine program racing the calendar. Jim Hall still dragged it to 6th in the driver's standings. The car deserved better. The schedule simply refused to provide it. Which brought everything to the finale. Riverside, California, October 4th. Jones had taken Kent. Now he needed one more. But he used his eye, and by the reports of the day, he won that last race, nursing a wounded Mustang, fading brakes, a tired engine, held together by school bus yellow paint and stubbornness, while Donohue's Javelin broke beneath him. Final manufacturer's score, Ford, 72 points. American Motors, 59. Chevrolet, 40, and the driver's title. Parnelli Jones over Mark Donohue, by 1 point. One single point, after 11 races and 6 months of open warfare. The closest championship the series had ever seen. So absorb the full picture of 1970. The Camaro, more horsepower, quicker in the magazines, prettier in every photograph. The Mustang, smaller engine, slower at the stoplight, and champion of everything that mattered. The Boss 302 won the war and lost the stoplight. And honestly, somebody should print that sentence on a poster and hang it above a toolbox, because it's the most muscle car lesson ever taught. Ford's 3rd Trans Am crown, snatched back from the 2-time champion, with a quarter of the old budget. The accountants have never been so confused by a victory party. And then, plot twist, everybody went home. Ford, having finally reclaimed the crown, withdrew its factory support after the season. By 1971, every American manufacturer except American Motors had abandoned the series. the Boss 302 was discontinued, replaced by the Boss 351. The LT1 had its compression slashed for 71 as emissions rules moved in. The greatest single season in pony car history turned out to be the last one. 1970 wasn't just the summit, it was the cliff on the other side. The golden hour and the sunset, same year, same tracks. Still with me? Good, because 55 years later, the receipts are still being printed. Why did it all collapse? The unglamorous trio, insurance, emissions, and accounting. Premiums on performance cars were becoming ransom notes. Washington was writing clean air rules that solid lifter, 11-to-1 engines simply could not survive. And racing budgets looked absurd to companies watching the muscle market cool. So Donohue and the Javelin steamrolled 1971 against a paddock of empty garages, which, respectfully, is less winning a war and more jogging through a battlefield after the armistice. The party of 1970 didn't wind down. The lights just snapped off. But here's the thing about legends, they refuse to stay buried. 4 decades later, Ford resurrected the Boss 302 name on a Mustang built specifically to hunt BMW. We covered it. Chevrolet resurrected the Z28 badge on a track weapon that ran within a tenth of a Ferrari. Covered that too. Neither company chose those names by accident. Every serious track-focused pony car since points directly back to one season, one rulebook, and one very stubborn man in an orange Mustang. And the collector market has issued its verdict, loudly. Today, a 1970 Boss 302 averages roughly $95,000 at auction, with documented, matching numbers cars, the ones with their original build records, climbing far higher. The record sale, over $250,000. The 1970 Z28, objectively the quicker street car, recently trades in the mid to high 50,000s, with only exceptional examples crossing 100. Same year, same class, same battlefield, and the champion commands roughly 50% more money. Racing pedigree, it turns out, is compound interest. Notice the beautiful inversion from our last episode. In 1993, the car that lost the magazine test won the auctions 30 years later. In 1970, the car that lost the magazine test won the championship and the auctions. Collectors don't pay for quarter-mile slips. They pay for scarcity and story. 7,000 Bosses versus 8,700 Z28s. Both rare. But only one of them carries a 1-point title fight, a fired Shelby, a stock car underdog, and Parnelli Jones in its glove box. Story wins. Story always wins. So who actually won 1970? Honestly, the customer did. Because for one shining season, racing rules forced Detroit to park genuine competition machinery in ordinary showrooms. A school teacher could finance a homologation special. A dentist could daily drive a championship program. That deal has never been offered again at those prices, and it never will be. The Camaro won the street. The Mustang won the war. And anyone with $3,700 and questionable judgment won biggest of all. There's a bigger lesson buried here too, the Ken Burns part. 1970 was the same argument we keep finding in every era of this rivalry. Chevrolet read the rules cleverly and gave buyers maximum engine. Ford stayed loyal to a pure formula and out-executed everyone where it counted. Neither approach was wrong. The grid needed both, the loophole and the loyalty, because rivals don't sharpen each other by agreeing. 55 years later, enthusiasts still argue about which car was better. That argument is the trophy. It never stopped being contested. So the next time someone tells you the faster car always wins, walk them through 1970. Show them a 2-time champion with 70 extra horsepower finishing third. Show them a slashed budget, a fired legend, and a stock car mechanic delivering a championship. Show them Riverside, October 4th, a wounded school bus yellow Mustang, and a title decided by 1 point. 1. Then remind them the slower car is now worth 50% more, and watch their entire worldview file for bankruptcy. Horsepower starts arguments. History finishes them. If you enjoyed watching a rulebook, a mechanic, and one very angry school bus yellow Mustang humiliate an entire spreadsheet of superior numbers, you're in the right garage. Hit subscribe. It takes 1 point, and around here, 1 point wins championships. Now settle it in the comments. The Camaro that won the street, or the Mustang that won the war. Which one's in your dream garage? Next time, another rivalry, another rulebook, another decision that made perfect sense until the checkered flag. This is Car Chronicles, where 1 point beats 70 horsepower.